He's not coming, sweetheart. Stop checking your phone. Sarah looked up from her seat at JFK's International Terminal, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her white wedding dress still pristine despite the chaos of her abandoned wedding 6 hours ago. The man who spoke wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair combed back, a scar running along his jawline that somehow made him more distinguished than menacing. "You don't know that," she whispered, though her voice carried no conviction. Marcus had promised. They were supposed to fly to Santorini for their honeymoon. The tickets were in her trembling hands. 2 seats, only one filled. "I do know. I watched him leave through the employee exit 2 hours ago with a blonde woman." The stranger sat beside her without asking permission, his presence commanding despite his calm demeanor. He had 3 suitcases. She was wearing his grandmother's necklace, the sapphire one you wore at the engagement party last month. Sarah's breath caught. How did this man know about the necklace? Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. It helps us bring you more content like this. "Who are you?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice despite the public setting. "My name is Vincent Costello. Your fiancé, former fiancé, worked for me." Past tense being the operative word. He pulled out a handkerchief, surprisingly offering it to her. Marcus had a gambling problem. He owed the wrong people considerable money. "The wedding was never real, Sarah. You were insurance. Your father's construction company, your family's connections to city contracts, that's what he wanted." The terminal spun around her. Every moment of the past year suddenly recalibrated in her mind. Marcus's urgent proposal, after only 3 months of dating, his sudden interest in her father's business dinners, the way he always steered conversations toward municipal projects. "You're lying," she said, but she was already seeing the truth in the patterns. "I wish I was. Check your joint bank account." Vincent's dark eyes held something unexpected. Sympathy. "He cleaned it out this morning. Transferred everything to an offshore account we've been tracking." Sarah's hands shook as she opened her banking app. Negative $247. Her savings, her inheritance from her grandmother, the $50,000 her parents had given them for the wedding, gone. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, anger finally breaking through the shock. "Because Marcus made his choices, but you shouldn't have to pay for them. And because," Vincent paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I need someone with your particular set of skills, and you need to disappear from New York for a while. When Marcus's creditors realize he's gone, they'll come looking for any assets they can liquidate. That includes questioning you extensively about his whereabouts. I don't know anything about. They won't believe that, and their methods of inquiry are considerably less polite than mine." Vincent stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "I have a proposition. Come with me to Italy. I have properties in Sicily that need legitimate business management. Hotels, restaurants, vineyards. You studied hospitality management at Cornell. You speak Italian thanks to your semester in Rome, and you have a talent for making troubled enterprises profitable based on what you did for your father's company last year. You've been watching me. I watch everyone associated with people who work for me." Due diligence. He pulled out an envelope, placing it on the seat between them. "Inside is a one-way ticket to Palermo, leaving in 3 hours. Also a contract for a 1-year position managing my hotel properties in Sicily. Salary $200,000, with housing included, plus restoration of the money Marcus stole from you. No strings attached to the job itself. It's legitimate business. What you choose to learn about my other enterprises while you're there is your prerogative." "Why would you do this?" Sarah looked at the envelope like it might explode. "Because I'm a businessman, and you're an asset Marcus wasted. because my daughter is getting married next month, and watching you sit here in that dress reminded me that some traditions should be respected, and because," his expression hardened slightly, "Marcus broke rules. He stole from an employee under my protection, and he made me look foolish by extension. This is partially my restitution." Sarah's mind raced. 3 hours ago, she'd been standing in St. Patrick's Cathedral, surrounded by 200 guests, watching the minutes tick past the ceremony start time. Her father had called Marcus 17 times. Her mother had tried to maintain dignity while quietly crying. Her bridesmaids had attempted optimism until the truth became undeniable. The humiliation would follow her everywhere in New York. Her family's business associates, her college friends, every person who'd witnessed her waiting at that altar would remember. But more than embarrassment, there was danger. Vincent wasn't exaggerating about Marcus's creditors. "What's in Sicily?" she asked. "A fresh start, beautiful coastline, the best food you've ever tasted, work that will challenge you, and time to figure out who you are when you're not trying to be who someone else needs you to be." Vincent pulled out his phone, showing her photos of a stunning cliffside hotel overlooking turquoise water, vineyard estates with ancient stone buildings, coastal restaurants with terraces facing the Mediterranean. The Hotel Costello in Taormina has been losing money for 3 years. The previous manager was skimming profits and destroying the reputation. You'll have complete operational authority. Fix it, and there's a performance bonus of $100,000. The other properties need similar attention. Sarah looked at her wedding dress, at the departure board showing flights to romantic destinations she'd never see, at her phone with 17 missed calls from her mother and dozens of texts she couldn't bear to read. "I don't speak Sicilian dialect. You'll learn. My nephew Marco will meet you in Palermo. He manages the vineyard operations. He'll get you settled. What if I say no? Then I wish you the best of luck, and I suggest you hire very good security for the next few months." Vincent's tone made clear this wasn't a threat from him but a warning about others. "But I don't think you'll say no. I think you're exactly like my daughter, strong enough to know when to walk away from ashes and build something new." Sarah picked up the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a business-class ticket, a temporary Italian work visa already processed, and a contract that looked surprisingly legitimate and detailed. There was also a cashier's check for $100,000, her stolen money, returned immediately. "How did you—" "I have resources. Consider it a signing bonus." Vincent stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "The choice is yours, Sarah. Stay in New York and face the aftermath, or come to Italy and become someone new. Either way, wear that dress or don't, but stop letting it define you." He walked 3 steps before turning back. "For what it's worth, any man who leaves a woman like you crying at an airport is too stupid to deserve success. Marcus will learn that lesson thoroughly. But you were smart enough to build a career despite him, strong enough to show up today despite your doubts, and brave enough to sit here in this terminal holding on to hope. That's the kind of person who succeeds in my world." Sarah watched him disappear into the crowd of travelers rushing toward their destinations. She looked at the ticket, departure in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Then she looked at her phone, where a new text from an unknown number had arrived. "Your father's company just received notice of a federal investigation into Marcus's activities. They'll want to question you. Choose quickly." The investigation would destroy her family. Every business deal Marcus had touched would be scrutinized. Her father's reputation, built over 30 years, would crumble under the weight of association with fraud. Unless she disappeared. Unless there was no one readily available to question. Sarah stood, her wedding dress drawing stares from every direction. She walked to the nearest restroom, locked herself in a stall, and stared at the white fabric that symbolized the biggest mistake she'd almost made. 10 minutes later, she emerged in jeans and a t-shirt she'd packed in her carry-on for the honeymoon that would never happen. The wedding dress stayed crumpled in the airport trash can, a symbolic death of who she'd been 3 hours ago. At the ticket counter, she checked in for Palermo. The agent looked at her sympathetically, perhaps noticing the tear-stained face or the absence of luggage beyond a single carry-on. "Starting a new adventure?" the woman asked kindly. "Something like that," Sarah replied, surprised to find her voice steady. As she walked toward security, her phone buzzed continuously. Her mother, her father, her bridesmaids, concerned guests. She turned it off. Whatever explanations were needed would have to wait until she understood what happened herself. Gate 47 was quiet, the late afternoon flight to Palermo not heavily booked. Sarah sat near the window, watching planes take off into the darkening New York sky. In her hand, she held Vincent's business card, embossed with elegant script, Costello Enterprises Limited, Legitimate Hospitality Holdings. The word legitimate carried weight in a way she was only beginning to understand. Her new life was somewhere over the Atlantic, waiting on an island where ancient ruins met modern luxury, where the Cosa Nostra had roots deeper than the olive trees, and where a woman with nothing left to lose might discover exactly what she was capable of becoming. The boarding announcement crackled overhead. Sarah grabbed her carry-on, took one last look at New York through the terminal windows, and walked toward the gate. She didn't look back. The plane touched down in Palermo 14 hours later, the Sicilian sunrise painting Mount Pellegrino in shades of gold and rose. Sarah had spent the flight oscillating between terror and excitement, ultimately settling on a grim determination. She'd lost everything in New York: her reputation, her savings, her future as she'd imagined it. There was nothing left to protect, which meant she had nothing left to fear. Palermo's airport was smaller than JFK, filled with the musical cadence of rapid Italian and the smell of fresh espresso from every corner cafe. Sarah's 4 years of Italian language study kicked in as she navigated customs, her tongue remembering the rhythm even as her vocabulary felt rusty. "Signorina Castellano." A young man in his early 30s approached her at baggage claim, though she had no baggage to claim. He was striking in that specifically Mediterranean way: olive skin, dark curly hair, warm brown eyes that assessed her with curiosity. "I'm Marco Costello. My uncle sent me to collect you." His English was perfect, carrying only the faintest Italian accent that made every word sound more interesting. "Sarah," she corrected. "Just Sarah." "Bene, just Sarah." Marco smiled, and she noticed the family resemblance to Vincent immediately. The same strong jawline, though without the scar, the same direct gaze. "How was your flight?" "Long. Strange. I'm still not entirely sure this is real." "Sicily has that effect. Wait until you see Taormina. You'll be certain you're dreaming." He gestured toward the exit. "I have a car waiting. It's about a 3-hour drive to your new home, but we'll stop in Cefalù for lunch. You must be hungry." Sarah realized she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, before her wedding that never was. Her stomach agreed loudly. The drive along Sicily's northern coast was breathtaking. The Tyrrhenian Sea sparkled beside them, impossibly blue under the morning sun. Small villages clung to hillsides, their pastel buildings weathered by centuries of salt air and history. Lemon groves stretched toward the mountains, and the air through the open window carried the scent of jasmine and sea. Marco drove confidently, one hand on the wheel, occasionally pointing out landmarks. "That's the Cathedral of Cefalù, Norman architecture, 12th century. The whole town looks like it hasn't changed since medieval times. Tourists love it, which is why we have 2 properties there." "We?" Sarah asked. "The family business. I manage the vineyards primarily, but we all understand every part of the operation. You'll do the same. It's how Sicilians work. Nothing is separate. Everything connects. There was meaning beneath his words, Sarah sensed. Vincent had said his businesses were legitimate, but the way Marco spoke suggested layers she didn't yet understand. They stopped in Cefalù at a small trattoria tucked into a narrow side street, away from the tourist-heavy piazza. The owner greeted Marco with the warmth reserved for family, kissing both his cheeks and immediately launching into rapid Sicilian dialect that Sarah couldn't follow. "Antonio says you're too skinny and need to eat properly," Marco translated with amusement. "He's not wrong. You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't." Sarah accepted the chair Marco pulled out for her, the simple courtesy feeling foreign after Marcus's increasing negligence over the past months. The food arrived without ordering: pasta con lessard, fresh bread with local olive oil, grilled swordfish, caponata. Each dish was a revelation of flavor. Sarah found herself eating ravenously, the simple act of tasting good food grounding her in the present moment. "My uncle doesn't usually make offers like this," Marco said carefully, watching her over his wineglass. "He must see something in you." "Or see utility," Sarah replied, her business mind cutting through sentiment. "Same thing, in his world. Vincent doesn't distinguish between people he respects and people he can use effectively. If you're both, you're valuable." Marco leaned back. "But I should be honest with you, Sarah. Sicily isn't like New York. The rules are different here. Family loyalty matters more than law. History matters more than money. And what you don't ask about is as important as what you do." "You're warning me. I'm preparing you. The Hotel Costello is a legitimate business, completely above board, all taxes paid, all licenses proper. But the reason it's been losing money is because the previous manager tried to use it for laundering operations without permission. Vicente removed him permanently." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Permanently. He's alive, if that's your concern. Just living in Calabria now, running a small bakery, knowing better than to ever touch anything connected to this family again." Marco's expression was matter of fact. "My uncle values reputation. The hotel's good name was being destroyed. He corrected that situation. And what am I correcting? The actual business problems: occupancy rates, staff morale, service quality, profit margins. Things that require legitimate hospitality management expertise." Marco met her eyes steadily. "But you'll learn quickly that in Sicily, every business has relationships. Suppliers, employees, local officials, neighboring business owners. Some of those relationships connect to other enterprises. Your job is to manage the hotel brilliantly and be smart enough not to ask about the parts that don't concern you. And if I accidentally stumble onto something that does concern me, then you come to me or Vicente and we handle it. You don't handle it yourself. You don't go to authorities. You trust family." He paused. "That's what you're becoming by accepting this position, family. It's not just employment, it's membership in something older and more binding." Sarah should have felt afraid. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Marcus had betrayed her with legal documents and social conventions. Perhaps there was something more honest about a world where loyalty was explicitly valued and betrayal explicitly punished. "I understand," she said finally. "Do you?" Marco studied her. "Because I need to know you won't panic the first time you see something unusual. I need to know you won't become a liability. My former fiancé stole $250,000 from me, left me at the altar in front of 200 people, and apparently had me targeted by his creditors. I got on a plane to Sicily 8 hours later with a man I'd just met based on a job offer I don't fully understand." Sarah's voice was steady. "I don't panic easily, Marco, and I learn fast." A slow smile spread across his face. "Now I see why Uncle Vicente chose you. You have Sicilian blood in you somewhere, I think." My grandmother was from Puglia. Close enough. Marco raised his wineglass. Benvenuta in Sicilia, Sarah. Welcome to your new life. They touched glasses, the crystal chiming softly in the quiet restaurant. Through the window, Sarah could see tourists taking photos of the medieval cathedral, guidebooks in hand, experiencing Sicily as a vacation destination. She was experiencing something else entirely, a descent into a world where business and loyalty and ancient codes intertwined in ways she didn't yet comprehend. But she would. Sarah had always been a fast learner. The rest of the drive to Taormina passed with Marco explaining the region's history, the hotel's current challenges, and the staff she'd be inheriting. The head chef, Antonio, different Antonio from the restaurant, has been there 20 years. He's loyal but set in his ways. The front desk manager, Julia, is excellent but frustrated by the previous mismanagement. The housekeeping supervisor, Rosa, will either love you or hate you, depending on your first interaction. Sounds like any hotel staff, Sarah observed. Mostly, except they all know the family owns the property, which means they won't question certain things. That makes them easy to manage in some ways, difficult in others. They'll be very curious about the American woman Vicente sent to fix things. As they climbed the winding road toward Taormina, the view opened up dramatically. The ancient Greek theatre overlooked the coast, Mount Etna rising majestically in the distance, its peak still snow-capped despite the warm spring weather. The town itself seemed to tumble down the hillside, bougainvillea cascading from every terrace, lemon trees heavy with fruit. And there, positioned to capture the most stunning views, was Hotel Costello. It was smaller than Sarah expected, only 40 rooms, but breathtaking in its setting. The building had been a 19th-century villa, renovated with respect for its original architecture. Terraces overlooked the sea, gardens fragrant with jasmine and orange blossoms surrounded the property, and an infinity pool seemed to spill directly into the Mediterranean below. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed. "It should be thriving," Marco said, his tone turning serious. Location, history, luxury amenities, everything needed for success. But occupancy is at 40%. Online reviews mention rude staff, poor service, uncomfortable rooms. The restaurant is losing money despite having one of the best chefs in Sicily. Your job is to figure out what's broken and fix it. He pulled into the circular driveway where a small group waited. Sarah recognized the assessing gazes of longtime staff, seeing their new boss for the first time, a young American woman who looked barely 30, carrying only a single bag, arriving in Marco Costello's car. "Remember," Marco said quietly before she opened the door, "confidence matters more than knowledge here. They need to believe you can lead." Sarah stepped out of the car, her posture straightening automatically. She'd run successful projects for her father's company. She'd graduated top of her hospitality management class. The fact that she'd just fled New York in the aftermath of the worst day of her life didn't change her capabilities. "Buongiorno," she said clearly, her Italian rusty but serviceable. "I'm Sarah, your new general manager. I'm here to listen, learn, and work with all of you to make Hotel Costello the success it deserves to be." A woman in her 50s stepped forward. Rosa, Sarah guessed from Marco's description. She looked Sarah up and down with frank appraisal. "You're very young," Rosa said in Italian. "And you're very direct," Sarah replied in the same language, matching her tone. "I appreciate that. I'd rather work with people who tell me the truth than people who hide problems." Something shifted in Rosa's expression. "Then we'll get along. Come, I'll show you your quarters." As Sarah followed Rosa into the hotel, Marco caught her eye and nodded slightly. She'd passed the first test. Her apartment was on the top floor, a converted suite with its own terrace overlooking the water. Simple but elegant, whitewashed walls, terracotta floors, furniture that looked locally crafted. Someone had left fresh flowers on the table and a bottle of wine with a note in Vincent's handwriting: "To new beginnings, trust your instincts. V." Sarah stood on the terrace as the sun began setting over the Tyrrhenian Sea, painting the sky in impossible colors. Somewhere below, hotel guests were dining on the restaurant terrace, unaware of the management change happening above them. Somewhere in New York, her family was probably still trying to reach her, demanding explanations. But she wasn't in New York anymore. She was in Sicily, standing on the edge of something she didn't fully understand, holding a position that was somehow both exactly what it claimed to be and much more. Her phone, which she'd turned back on during the drive, showed 73 missed calls and dozens of messages. Sarah composed a single text to her parents: "I'm safe. I need time. I'll explain when I can. Please trust me. I love you." Then she turned the phone off again. Tomorrow she would start learning the hotel's true situation. Tonight she would sleep for the first time in 2 days, in a bed that didn't carry memories of Marcus, in a place where nobody knew her story or her shame. The Mediterranean wind carried the scent of lemon blossoms and salt. In the distance, she could hear singing from somewhere in the town, someone's celebration, their joy carried on the evening air. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself feel the moment. Exhaustion, relief, uncertainty, and underneath it all, something unexpected. Possibility. She'd come to Italy not as a bride, but as something else entirely. Now she just had to discover what that was. Sarah's first week at Hotel Costello was a baptism by fire. The problems were worse than Marco had indicated. Or perhaps he'd wanted her to discover them herself. The rooms were adequately clean but sterile, lacking any character that would justify the premium pricing. The restaurant menu hadn't changed in 3 years, despite seasonal ingredients being Sicily's greatest culinary advantage. Staff morale was rock bottom, with departments barely communicating with each other. And the previous manager had implemented bizarre cost-cutting measures that destroyed the guest experience. The pool was only heated on weekends. Breakfast ended at 8:30 a.m. despite guests wanting to sleep late on vacation, and the complimentary wine tasting that had once distinguished the hotel had been eliminated entirely. But worse than the operational problems was the atmosphere. Sarah felt it immediately, a tension in how staff interacted, whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, deliveries that arrived through the back entrance with unusual secrecy. On her 3rd day, she found Antonio the chef in a heated argument with the supplier in the loading dock. The man was demanding double the usual payment for produce that looked standard quality. "Is there a problem?" Sarah asked in Italian, her presence immediately silencing both men. "No problem, signorina," Antonio said quickly, too quickly. The supplier, a thick-necked man with calculating eyes, looked her over with open disdain. "You're the new American manager? Tell your chef he needs to understand how business works here." "I understand how business works everywhere," Sarah replied coolly. "Quality produce at fair market rates, delivered on schedule, invoiced properly. What I don't understand is why you're demanding double the price for the same vegetables I saw at the Catania market this morning for 1/3 of your quote." The supplier's expression darkened. "Perhaps you should ask Marco Costello about special arrangements." "Perhaps you should leave," Sarah said, her voice dropping to the tone she'd used when firing incompetent contractors from her father's projects. "And don't come back. Antonio, I need a list of 3 alternative suppliers by tomorrow morning." After the man left, with significantly more hostility than was warranted by a simple contract termination, Antonio pulled Sarah aside. "Signorina, that was very unwise." "Why?" "He was clearly overcharging us." "Because Luca Moretti has arrangements with many businesses in the region. He won't appreciate being dismissed by someone who doesn't understand the territory." Then he can take his concerns to Vincent Costello, Sarah said firmly, though her pulse had quickened. If there are arrangements, they should improve our business, not damage it. We're paying premium prices for mediocre produce. That stops now. Antonio studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which. Can't I be both? Sarah replied, earning a surprised laugh. By evening, Marco appeared at her apartment unannounced. I hear you've made your first enemy. News travels fast. This is Sicily. News travels before it happens. Marco settled onto her terrace, accepting the wine she offered. Luca Moretti called me very upset that the new manager doesn't understand traditional relationships. Traditional extortion, you mean? He was charging you double the market rate. I know. That was part of what the previous manager arranged, kickbacks that went into his pocket instead of the hotel's operations. But Luca is connected to the Messina family, who control distribution in this region. Dismissing him without consultation was aggressive. Sarah's stomach tightened. Did I create a problem for Vincent? Actually, you created an opportunity. Marco's smile was enigmatic. Vincent has been looking for a reason to renegotiate terms with the Messina family. Your innocent firing of their overpriced supplier gives him leverage. He can claim his new American manager doesn't understand the old arrangements and use that to reset everything. So I was useful by accident. Or he anticipated you'd react exactly as you did. Vincent doesn't hire people who accept bad deals quietly. Marco tilted his glass toward her. But there will be a meeting tomorrow. You'll need to attend. A meeting with who? Representatives from several families who have interests in Taormina's hospitality industry. They'll want to understand who you are and what your presence means for existing arrangements. Think of it as an introduction. Sarah's mouth went dry. This sounds less like a business meeting and more like a tribunal. It's Sicily. They're the same thing. Just be yourself. Smart, direct, unafraid. They'll respect that. And Sarah? Marco's expression grew serious. Don't apologize. Apologies here are seen as weakness. You did what you thought was right for the business. Stand by that. The meeting took place in a private room at a restaurant in Taormina's historic center. Sarah dressed carefully, a tailored navy suit that was professional but not soft, heels that added authority to her height, minimal jewelry. She pulled her blonde hair back severely, wanting to look like someone who couldn't be dismissed as a pretty young American in over her head. Marco drove her, offering last-minute advice. Giancarlo Messina will do most of the talking. He's old school, very traditional about women in business. Don't let that intimidate you. His nephew Paolo is younger, more moderate. If you can win Paolo's respect, Giancarlo will eventually follow. What about Vincent? Will he be there? No. This is your meeting. You created the situation, you handle it. That's how family works. We support each other, but we don't rescue each other from consequences. Helpful, Sarah thought grimly. The restaurant was closed to regular customers, a sign of the meeting's significance. Inside, 7 men sat around a long table, their ages ranging from 30s to 70s. Sarah recognized the power dynamic immediately. 3 clear factions represented, each with distinct agendas. Giancarlo Messina sat at the head of the table, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades making difficult decisions. To his right was Paolo Messina, younger and sharper, watching Sarah with open curiosity. The other men she didn't recognize, but their deference to the Messinas was clear. Signorina Castellano, Giancarlo said, his Italian formal and old-fashioned. Please, sit. Sarah took the chair Marco pulled out for her, positioning herself at the other end of the table. not submissive, but not presumptuous. Thank you for meeting with me. We were curious about Vincent Costello's new American manager, especially after you so boldly dismissed Luca Moretti. Giancarlo's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. I apologize for not consulting with Don Costello before making that decision, Sarah said carefully, addressing Marco rather than the assembled men. I was operating from a business perspective, not understanding there were existing arrangements. And now that you understand? Paolo asked, his English surprising her. Now I understand that the hotel has been systematically damaged by arrangements that profited individuals while hurting the business. Whether those individuals were the previous manager or your suppliers, the result is the same. A property that should be thriving is barely surviving. Silence fell across the table. Marco's warning echoed, "Don't apologize, stand your ground." "You're very direct," Giancarlo observed. "I'm American," Sarah replied simply, "but I'm also good at my job. Hotel Costello can be the premier property in Taormina. That benefits everyone. My employer, your legitimate businesses in the region, the town's tourism reputation. But not if we're operating with overpriced suppliers delivering mediocre quality. And if we tell you that Luca's prices are simply how business is done here," an older man to Giancarlo's left asked, "then I'd respectfully suggest that's why Sicilian hospitality businesses often struggle to compete with international chains. Tourists come here for authenticity and excellence, not inflated prices and compromised quality. If we want to compete with the Four Seasons and the Bellman properties that are expanding in Sicily, we need to operate efficiently." "She has a point," Paolo said, surprising his uncle. "The market is changing. Tourists have more choices. If we want Taormina to remain competitive, we've managed fine for decades without American business advice," the older man interrupted. "Have you?" Sarah kept her voice level, but challenged directly. "Hotel occupancy rates in Taormina have dropped 15% over the past 5 years. Restaurants are closing. Young Sicilians are leaving for opportunities elsewhere. The old ways aren't working as well as they used to." "Careful, Signorina," Giancarlo warned, though his tone carried more interest than anger. "I'm not trying to insult tradition," Sarah said, meeting his gaze. "I'm trying to save it. Sicily has incredible advantages: culture, food, beauty, history. But if the business infrastructure doesn't support excellence, tourists will go elsewhere. They'll go to Croatia, to Greece, to Portugal, places that want their money and deliver value. That hurts everyone in this room." Paolo leaned forward. "What do you propose?" "Fair market pricing for quality supplies, reliable delivery schedules. The hotel pays promptly and professionally. Suppliers deliver excellence consistently. We showcase Sicilian produce, wine and craftsmanship at the highest level. That creates reputation value for everyone involved. And we coordinate. If a supplier has product to promote, we feature it. If the hotel is hosting events, local businesses get preferential consideration. Partnership, not extraction. And if some of our businesses require flexibility in how things are documented." Paolo's question was careful. Sarah understood the subtext immediately. "I manage the hotel. How you manage your supply businesses is your concern. As long as what arrives at my loading dock is what's invoiced, at agreed prices, with proper quality, I have no reason to ask questions I don't need answers to." Marco had been right. The key was understanding what not to be curious about. Giancarlo and Paolo exchanged a long look, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Giancarlo nodded. "You're smarter than we expected, Signorina." "Very well. We'll arrange new supplier agreements at fair market rates. In exchange, Hotel Costello receives first priority for any special events we host and recommends our legitimate businesses to your guests. Does this arrangement satisfy both parties? It does, Sarah confirmed. One more thing. Giancarlo's expression hardened slightly. Luca Moretti is my wife's nephew. You embarrassed him publicly. This cannot stand without acknowledgement. Sarah's pulse jumped. What kind of acknowledgement? Have him to the hotel for a private dinner. Serve an excellent meal featuring produce from our new arrangements. Let him see that you were improving business, not disrespecting him personally. Allow him to save face. It was genius, really, turning a conflict into a demonstration of the new system's superiority. I can do that. This weekend? Perfect. Giancarlo stood, signaling the meeting's end. Welcome to Taormina, Signorina Castellano. I think you'll find that when we work together rather than at cross purposes, Sicily rewards those who understand its way of doing business. As the men filed out, Paolo lingered. That was well done. My uncle doesn't respect easily, but you earned it. By almost starting a war, Sarah asked wryly, by understanding when to fight and when to compromise. That's rarer than you think. He handed her a business card. If you need anything, questions about local customs, recommendations for the hotel, or just someone who speaks English when Sicily becomes overwhelming, call me. His smile was friendly, but carried an edge of something else. Interest, maybe. Sarah pocketed the card without committing. Thank you. Indeed. In Marco's car, heading back to the hotel, Sarah finally exhaled. That was terrifying. You were magnificent, Marco countered. Do you know how rare it is for someone to challenge Giancarlo Messina and walk out with a better deal? Vincent will be impressed. I nearly caused a family incident. You caused a necessary reset. The old arrangements weren't working for anyone except corrupt middlemen. Now everyone wins. The hotel gets better supplies at better prices, the Messina family maintains their distribution relationship and gets access to our guest network, and Vincent demonstrates that his businesses operate on merit, not intimidation. Sarah looked out at the coastline as they climbed back toward the hotel. This is all so much more complicated than I expected. Sicily is layers upon layers of complication. You've seen one layer today. There are others you haven't encountered yet. But Sarah, Marco glanced at her seriously, you have instincts for this. Most people freeze up in situations like that meeting. You analyzed the power dynamics and found a solution that gave everyone something. That's a rare skill. I've been negotiating difficult business relationships since I was 22 working for my father. Not like this, you haven't. But you adapted. That matters here more than experience. Back at the hotel, Sarah found a message waiting. Well done. V. Somehow, Vincent knew about the meeting outcome already. Of course he did. This was his world, and she was just beginning to understand its rules. That night, Sarah stood on her terrace and called her parents for the first time since leaving New York. Her mother answered on the first ring. Sarah, oh my God, where are you? Are you safe? We've been losing our minds. I'm safe, Mom. I'm in Sicily. I have a job managing a hotel. I'm okay. Sicily? You just disappeared. After everything with Marcus, you just vanished. I had to. Mom, there's so much I can't explain yet, but I'm not in danger. Actually, I think I'm exactly where I need to be. Her father's voice came on. Apparently they'd been on speaker. The FBI contacted us. They have questions about Marcus and his business activities. Sarah, whatever you're involved in, I'm not involved in anything except running a legitimate hotel. I'm doing the job I was trained for. I just needed to get away from New York while everything settled down. They talked for an hour, Sarah carefully editing the truth while trying to reassure them. She couldn't tell them about Vincent Costello's real business empire or the meeting with the Messina family. They'd never understand. Hell, she barely understood it herself. "Will you come home?" her mother asked finally. Sarah looked out at the Mediterranean under moonlight, at the ancient town cascading down the hillside, at the life she was building from the ruins of what she'd left behind. "Not yet. Maybe not for a while. This is home now." After hanging up, Sarah poured herself wine and reviewed the hotel's financial reports for the third time that week. With better supplier arrangements and the operational changes she was implementing, they could be profitable within 6 months. Occupancy was already climbing. Word of mouth about the improved restaurant had started spreading, and she'd been aggressively managing the hotel's online presence and reviews. A knock interrupted her analysis. Marco stood in her doorway with a bottle of expensive whiskey and 2 glasses. "Celebrating or commiserating?" Sarah asked. "Celebrating. You survived your first real Sicilian negotiation. That deserves acknowledgement." He poured them both generous measures. To the American woman who outmaneuvered Giancarlo Messina, they touched glasses, the liquid burning warm down Sarah's throat. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah ventured after a moment. "Depends on the question. How legitimate is legitimate? Vincent says his businesses are legal, but those meetings, those relationships, that's not how normal business works." Marco was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "In Sicily, there's legal and there's traditional. They overlap but aren't identical. The hotel is completely legal. Every license, every tax, every regulation followed precisely. But the way we interact with other businesses, the networks of obligation and favor, the understanding that some questions aren't asked, that's traditional. So I'm managing a legitimate business that operates within an illegitimate system. You're managing a legitimate business that operates within Sicilian reality. The system existed before you arrived and will exist after you leave. Your job is to make the hotel excellent while understanding that excellence requires navigating relationships others have already established. And if I can't live with that ambiguity, then you shouldn't have gotten on the plane." Marco's expression was sympathetic but firm. "But I don't think that's who you are, Sarah. I think you understand that morality isn't always simple, that the world operates in shades of grey, and that doing right by your employees and your guests sometimes means accepting that the sausage gets made in ways you'd rather not examine too closely." He was right, though Sarah wished he wasn't. Her entire life had been preparation for black and white decisions, right and wrong, legal and illegal, ethical and unethical. Sicily was teaching her that real life operated in spaces between those categories. "What happened to the previous manager?" she asked suddenly. "Vincent said he's running a bakery in Calabria. But how does someone go from skimming profits from a Costello business to living quietly elsewhere?" "Because Vincent is pragmatic. Giuseppe stole, yes, but he also had a family. Killing him would have created vendetta obligations, hurt innocent people, and damaged business relationships. Better to remove him, make clear why, and give him a chance to live differently. That's the difference between Vincent's approach and others. He understands that violence is expensive and should be reserved for problems that can't be solved any other way." "Has he ever—" Sarah couldn't finish the question. "Solved a problem that way? Yes, rarely, but when necessary. But those situations don't involve people like you, Sarah. You're not in danger. You're family now, protected, valued. The only way you'd be at risk is if you betrayed that family, and I don't think you're capable of betrayal, not after what Marcus did to you." Sarah thought about that, about how Marcus's betrayal had somehow prepared her for Vincent's world. She understood now that loyalty wasn't just about love or morality, it was about recognizing who stood by you when everything fell apart and honoring that bond. "I should let you sleep," Marco said, finishing his whiskey. "Tomorrow you start preparing for Luca's dinner. Make it spectacular. Show him what excellence looks like when business is done right." After he left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts and the gentle sound of the Mediterranean below. 2 weeks ago, she'd been standing in a wedding dress, watching her future crumble. Now she was in Sicily, managing a hotel for a man who operated at the intersection of legal and traditional, negotiating with families who'd controlled this island for generations, and discovering capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. The woman she'd been would never have believed this transformation was possible. The woman she was becoming understood that sometimes you had to break completely before you could rebuild into something stronger. Sarah raised her glass to the empty terrace, to the life she'd left behind and the future she was creating. "To new beginnings," she whispered, echoing Vincent's note. The Mediterranean wind carried her words away into the Sicilian night, where they joined centuries of other whispered promises and transformations that had shaped this ancient, complicated, beautiful island.